for CMM's founding executive director, Chuck Harper, this award recognizes tireless, distinguished commitment to the things that matter most. Reverend Walker is no stranger to Greater Boston. She's been an award-winning television journalist, a documentary film producer, entrepreneur, and humanitarian. Her career in broadcast journalism has garnered many awards, including 2 Emmys and an Edward R. Murrow Award. Alongside her friend, her sister in ministry, Reverend Dr. Gloria White Hammond, Liz has devoted herself to the work of a nonprofit, My Sister's Keeper, another CMM ally advocating for the needs and rights of women and children in Sudan who are attempting to rebuild their country and their lives. After serving as the anchor of the evening news and administering what I call daily doses of journalistic truth, Liz Walker experienced a call to preach another kind of truth. She studied at Harvard Divinity School and was ordained in the AME Church. She is a tireless voice for women, children, the homeless, and the most vulnerable among us, now serving as pastor of Roxbury Presbyterian Church. She's been a great friend to CMM, keynoting our Concord Advocacy Forum on homelessness. And on a more personal note, I will never forget traveling with Liz across the Holy Land in 2009 with a group of interfaith clergy singing and praying and dialoguing our way through both ancient history and current conflicts. Please give a round of applause to this year's recipient of the Chuck Harper Award.
And I really appreciate the organic way that you have handled my request this evening to change the schedule around. It was, thank you very much for your flexibility. I'm delighted to be with you this evening. It is amazing to me that this many people would come inside on such a beautiful night. So you must be doing something really right in this organization. I just wanted to tell you just for a few minutes about my story, because people say, well, I thought you were in television news, I thought you were doing something else, what happened, what changed? And so I just thought I'd share my story with you, because I think it speaks to what you're doing here with your work. Indeed, I was a television news reporter for 125 years in the Boston area. You may have remembered that. I had people come up and say, my grandmama used to watch it. And that's supposed to make me feel good? And back in 2001, I went on a story. I had read an article in the Boston Globe about slavery in Sudan. And it was an op-ed actually, about slavery in Sudan. It was unbelievable to me that slavery could exist in the 21st century. And so I thought this would be a great story. I called the writer of the op-ed, Charles Jacobs, and Charles Jacobs, who is a founder of the American Anti-Slavery Group here in Boston, invited me down to his office to tell me about the work he was doing in Sudan and South Sudan and the issues of, well, now I can look back and say genocide at the time. The issue was slavery and a civil war that had gone on for 2 decades, and invited me to travel to Sudan. As God would have it, my pastors, Reverend Dr. Ray Hammond and Reverend Dr. Gloria White Hammond, were on the board of the American Anti-Slavery Group, and Charles Jacobs had been inviting them to visit Sudan as well. And so I went on a story. Reporters are always looking for the next big story, the next big award, the next big lead, what have you. But when we got to Sudan, and there were probably 12 of us in this group that traveled from Boston in that summer of 2001, when we got there, what we saw, I had never seen before. I had never been face to face with that kind of inhumanity. I had never seen that kind of suffering. I had never seen conflict areas before. I had never seen people who had lost limbs, women who had been gang raped, children whose fathers had been macheted and hacked to death. It just, I'd never seen it. And I was with people who were as stunned as I was. We traveled around the south part of Sudan. The war was still going on back then. from village to village for about 2 weeks, probably 10 days as I recall. And we talked to people who just told us horrendous things. I might have shot my video, I had my own camera at this time, and come back and told the story, and that might have been the end of it for me. But I went to Sudan with some people who are amazing. And Gloria White-Hammond said, there's something we can do here. And to me that was, what do you mean there's something we can do? We can talk to these people, we can take this story back to Boston, and that could be the end of it. We've done our job. But she said, no, there's something else that we can do here. And I was mesmerized as much by her conviction that there was something we could do as I was horrified by what I saw in Sudan. And so Reverend Dr. Gloria White-Hammond decided that we would go back and we would talk to the people in southern Sudan, in the villages where we visited. And to me it was just the most horrendous idea. How can one person do anything? The world's too big. This is a war that's been going on for 2 decades. What can we do? There's nothing we can do, Gloria. Are you crazy? But Gloria said, no, God says we can do something. I grew up in the church. My father was a preacher. And I was the kind of person who said, I will never, ever, ever, ever be a preacher. There is no money in it. There's not a lot of thank yous in it. It's just not the way to go. So faith to me was just something your daddy did up there and not anything real, at least not that I knew, until I went on this trip with people who were willing to put their faith on the line. And so Gloria White-Hammond, who is, as I said, one of the most amazing women that I know ever, ever, ever in my life, decided that we would go back to South Sudan and that we would do something to help the people. And so we did. And that was July of 2001. And if you are blessed in life, and it's a kind of a strange blessing, you will run into something that will hit you like a ton of bricks, and it will change everything. And that's what that summer did for me. Because I went to Sudan to just report on the news, not thinking that I could change the news. And I went to Sudan as a reporter of the news, not thinking that I would eventually change into a preacher of the good news. So you never know how the world is going to impact you, and you never know your impact on the world. 11 years later, much work, many trips, fundraising, all kinds of transformative actions on our part, learning that justice indeed is the most public form of love. We have built a school in South Sudan. It is called the Kunyuk Girls School. We built it for about 300 girls, and on the first day of school, which was back about 4 years ago, there were 1,000 girls who were trying to get in our school. You see, in this part of Sudan, in the south of Sudan, which is now South Sudan, the world's newest country, in this part of Sudan, women had not been educated. And so this was the result of our 11-year journey to Sudan. The long story short is that the people said they wanted us to help them end the conflict there, help them end the war. But most importantly, they wanted to build a school for their girls. And once again, Gloria thought there was something we could do. Now, when I write the book, I might tell you that I too thought there was something we could do. But that'll be the book, because I want you to know the truth tonight, and you don't have to tell anybody I told you the truth. Sudan is a physically dangerous place, as you know. There are cultural, there are social, there are personal risks all over this work. And I did not jump at those risks. As a matter of fact, when Gloria called me after that first trip, she said, I really believe we need to go back. I said, Gloria, we can't go back because we've gone through September 11th. Of all the countries in the world they tell you not to go to, the State Department says do not go to Sudan because now we know this is a terrorist nation. She said, nope, we have to go back because there's something we can do. And so when I talk about Sudan, I talk about risk. But I want you to understand the kind of risk I'm talking about. Everything that we've done in Sudan was a risk, but ultimately it was the risk of love. The risk of love, the risk of love. You know, we talk about risk in the context of our economy is reeling from the effects of institutions taking on too much risk. After September 11th, we worked hard to avoid risk. An attitude of risk aversion has taken over this culture. I didn't fly for years after September 11th. There is dangerous behavior, and we define risk like that. That's not what I'm talking about. The risk that I'm talking about in my tradition comes from the book of Matthew. Jesus makes this premier sermon when it's called the Sermon on the Mount, but it's his first sermon. He begins his ministry. And in the section halfway through the sermon, he talks about loving enemies. He says, you have heard that it is said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy, but I tell you, you need to love your enemy. Because if you love those who love you, what good is that? That's easy. The hard part is to love somebody who's different from you. The hard part is to love somebody who doesn't look like you. The hard part is to love somebody who might have a different way of seeing God. That's the hard part. And Jesus says, that's what I want you to do. I want to love you to love somebody that normally would be your enemy. And he uses a word, and I went over to Harvard and I studied this so I know it's true. He uses a word that in the Greek interpretation is plethysmo, overabundance, fullness. He says, you've got to do more than just love your neighbor. You've got to love to excess. And I love that because excess, excessive love. When was the last time you heard anything about excessive love? Let me tell you when I heard it. OJ's trial. You remember? See, y'all, well, I was watching OJ a lot. And OJ said, I loved her too much. That was one of his defenses, but he didn't kill her, but he loved her too much. We don't talk about love in terms of excess. And I believe that's what we need to talk about. Because excessive love is over the top, abundant love. It's the kind of love that goes way beyond what you would expect. It's the kind of love that I believe you have to work at. And it's the kind of love I learned after working in Sudan. Now, when you talk about love and risk, and love is one of those tough titles too, because we talk about love all the time, but we're not quite sure what love means in this culture. And I think we need to think about that more. I go in bookstores and I always get books on what the newest books are on love. Okay, The Couple's Guide to Love and Money. That's what the world is talking about. Normal Men, Desperate Women. That's the shelf on love. He's not that into you, the no excuses truth to understanding guys. If you go to songs about love, and I don't understand hip-hop, so I can't tell you, and I'm sure there's some wonderful love songs in hip-hop, but I don't understand them. So I go to country music, and it says, here's one of the big songs, I got the hungries for your love, and I'm waiting in the welfare line. When you wrecked my lunch in a road map, I knew you meant goodbye. Love is a confusing concept. But the love that Jesus talks about in Matthew 5 is this love you have to work at. This love that is unconditional. This love that you get nothing back. And that's what Gloria and that's what Ray were teaching me about Sudan. We weren't going there because we were going to be on television. We weren't going there because we'd get an award afterwards. We weren't even going there to get an award from the Emmys or the Academy Awards. And that was problematic for me because that's kind of why I was going there. But they were saying, no, you go here because that's how you should treat your neighbor. And they were saying that your neighbor is not somebody you choose. Your neighbor is whoever is in need. And so all of that kind of twisted my idea about love, this notion of love. But when you think about it, this is the love and the justice that I grew up with. I was Dr. Martin Luther King came to Little Rock, Arkansas, and he was at the beginning of the civil rights movement. He had just had this successful busing event in Montgomery, Alabama. This is back in the 50s. And he was trying to make the decision of where he was going to take the civil rights movement, where he was going to be. Because it was really early, and people hadn't, there was no civil rights movement, but there were young people who were marching and going into Woolworth stores and protesting segregated doors and segregated lunch counters. And so they were out there, and Dr. King had had this successful march or the bus thing with Rosa Parks in Montgomery, and so he was being called to come out and join those young people in the mid-50s. But the church said, no, Dr. King, you need to stay in the pulpit where you are successful, because he was a great orator. And so Dr. King had this choice between the love that was very comfortable, which is the love of the inside the church, where we say we love people we know, and we love people on our committees, and we love people who we are, or the other choice was to go out into the streets where his destiny called him. But there was a great risk in that. Taylor Branch, in one of his powerful books in the trilogy, and this one was called Pillar of Fire, says that King's choice was between retreating to his comfort zone in the pulpit or going over the cliff. Now, King based that movement on law. People say, no, he was a Marxist, and no, he was on Gandhi. No, King defined this movement, especially the movement of nonviolent resistance, was on this whole idea that you stand up against people who do not like you, you love them back. You love that sheriff who's beating you with the hose and who's got the dog on you, not because you want something from him. You love him because he needs love. And that's a risky kind of love. But Martin Luther King did that. And when he came to this church in Little Rock, Arkansas, when I was a little girl in the first grade, and he's preaching to people about his decision to take this movement on, he inspired ordinary people, and this is the part I'll never forget, ordinary people, to do extraordinary things based on this notion of love. And there was a risk, and he paid the price. But you see, I forgot that. My generation forgot that. And we jumped all in it for the money, and money was good, and television news was good, and I got to go to all the best places and sit in all the right seats and see the Celtics play. And then I go to Sudan, and I see that the world is suffering. And I may have a good job, and people may recognize me, but there is pain in the world. And I have seen it one-on-one, eye to eye. I can tell you that while we are here in America having a pretty good time, the worst of times in America are 100 million times better than the situation in most of the world. I've seen this. And so, we are called to step out of our comfort zones and do something about it. And I am convinced that it will not be resolved only by economics. It will not be resolved only by political and diplomatic decisions. It will be resolved by spirit. That's right. That's what's going to change it. I'm convinced of that. Because when I'm out there doing it for my award, I'm only going to go so far. If I'm out there, you know, when I first went to Sudan, now this is where she jumps into a sermon and Nelson, will we ever go home? But when I first went to Sudan, I'm doing this report, right? So I packed all this makeup, because, you know, I'm going to be on TV. And I packed all these beautiful clothes. And I land, the charter plane lands. And you see people who have nothing. And I've got about 4 or 5 bags of Maybelline and clothes. And then you realize that it's 110 degrees. And you can't put no makeup on. And then we hired them from this particular village to carry our bags to the next one. And it was as if God just spoke to me. I could hear the voice. How do you feel with some woman with nothing, with your bags of makeup on her head? And that is the best she can do. And you feel about this small. So what I'm telling you is, my life was changed not so much because I saved the world, but because I stepped out in the world and it saved me. You see, there is an imbalance in the world right now. The 99 versus the 1. And those who don't have are in the vast majority. And those who have are just right here. And the only way you can see that is to step out there. And that is the greatest risk. It's not the risk that you're going to get killed. It's not the risk that you're going to be in a place and that they'll leave you or something like that. It's the risk of being open and vulnerable to something new and something different. And it changes you. And you can't go back to being what you used to be. And that's what happened to me. When Gloria and I went back, probably the 3rd or 4th trip, we lost our luggage in either Chicago or Nairobi. I'm not sure. I guess it doesn't really matter. But we got to Nairobi and they couldn't find our luggage. And a decision had to be made whether we would go on into the bush or not. We had nothing. You have to take everything in with you. The people have nothing in these villages, so you have to take your tent, you have to take your food, you have to take your water, because these are the most marginalized people on the globe. Somalia, Sudan, these are one of the poorest nations in the world. And so you're going into one of the most remote villages, so you have to take everything. So Gloria said, we should go on in because we're this far. We might as well go. Let's go to a store. We'll get what we can. We'll get some water. We'll get some T-shirts. And we'll go on in the village. And we go in. We get on the plane and literally had nothing. The word had gotten somehow through satellite phone to our people in the village that we had lost all our luggage. And I will never forget this scene. We get off the plane. And, you know, we have some water, we have some things. And the people from the village of Lacan meet us at the airstrip. And they bring us wraps, the women. Wraps, so we can wear their clothes. And they bring us, these men brought these cots that they had made, hand-hewn cots, and some strips of cloth that we could sleep in. And they brought us goat that we could eat. And I realized that there is reciprocity in the world. That you think you're going to help them, but they helped us. And so, I just want you to know that this is what keeps you going, you see. It's the grace that's there. It's the grace that's in the midst of the madness. And we get tired, and you wonder if you're making any difference, and you wonder if anything's going to ever change, and then somebody just hands you what they have when they have nothing, and saves your life. And so it's God's grace that keeps me going now. I don't make any money anymore. I can't get good seats. And I'm getting old. I'm getting old. But I live on God's grace. And so my sermon, if there is one, is that I believe right now, as Latifah already mentioned, we're in this kind of cosmic shift of the universe. I call it a kairos moment. Kairos from the Greek rhetoric and Greek philosophy, the moment when the stars are lined up and the universe is right and ripe for change. It's a moment of great peril, but a moment of great potential. That's that's why we're in the midst of a global economic meltdown, and there's global warming, and there's a water shortage, and animals are threatened, and there are political problems all over the world, but that's also why you have Arab Spring and the Occupy movement, and all of these points of shift and change. And you do have to change who you are. You do have to change the way you're looking at things, and you do have to have creative ways of dealing with the problems in the world. But this is your moment. It's your moment. It's your time. And you can make a difference. And so I sing to the choir tonight that what you're doing is absolutely the right thing. You've got to cross boundaries. You've got to cross borders. And if we don't save ourselves, who will? So God bless you for your efforts, CMM. Despite what you call yourselves, despite how hard you have to work to go on, keep on doing what you're doing, because it matters. It all matters. And the risk is the reward, because you will be changed by the experience. So God bless all of you, and thank you.